A path back to love. Love, loss, and redemption. Once upon a time, there was a man named David. He was a hard-working husband and father, but over the past few years, life had become overwhelming. He had been married to Sarah for 12 years, and they had 4 beautiful children together, Emma, Noah, Lucas, and Sophie. Their home was always full of noise, children running around, the constant needs and demands of family life, and the weight of work, bills, and responsibilities pressing down on him every single day. David had once been deeply in love with Sarah, but now, things felt different. Their conversations often turned into arguments, and their affection faded into routine. He found himself thinking, more often than he liked, about what life would be like if he simply walked away. The thought scared him, but it also tempted him. One night, after yet another argument about finances and the kids, David had had enough. He grabbed his jacket and walked out the door, not even telling Sarah where he was going. He needed air, he needed space, and most of all, he needed to think. He made his way to the city garden, a small park in the middle of town where people would often sit and reflect. It was late, and the streets were quiet, with only the distant hum of cars passing by. The moonlight bathed the garden in a soft, silvery glow, and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze made the place feel peaceful. David found a bench near a small pond and sat down, burying his face in his hands. He was torn between his responsibilities and the desire for freedom. The thought of leaving his wife and children felt selfish, but he was exhausted. He didn't know how much longer he could hold everything together. As he sat there in silence, lost in his thoughts, he heard the soft shuffle of footsteps approaching. He looked up to see an old man slowly making his way toward the bench. The man was hunched over slightly, his white hair thinning, and his clothes were worn but clean. He carried a cane and moved with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who had lived a long, full life. The old man sat down on the other end of the bench without saying a word. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the gentle ripple of the water in the pond. After a few minutes, the old man glanced over at David. "Troubled night?" he asked softly, his voice raspy with age. David sighed and nodded. "Yeah, you could say that." The old man nodded as if he understood. "Marriage troubles?" David turned to look at him, surprised. "How did you know?" The old man smiled faintly, his eyes filled with wisdom and sadness. "I've been around long enough to see the signs. A man sitting alone in the park at night, staring at nothing, usually has something heavy on his heart. It's often about a woman, or the life they've built together." David let out a bitter chuckle. "Yeah, that's about right. I don't know if I can do it anymore. The fighting, the stress, the endless demands. I feel like I'm drowning." The old man nodded again, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I know how that feels. I was married for 52 years before my wife passed away last winter. It wasn't always easy. In fact, there were times when I wanted to walk out that door and never come back. But I didn't. And now, sitting here without her, I'd give anything to have one more fight, one more hard day, one more chance to make things right." David's heart tightened in his chest. He looked at the old man, who was staring off into the distance, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry for your loss," David said quietly. The old man smiled sadly. "Thank you. Her name was Margaret. She was the love of my life, but we didn't always like each other. Marriage isn't about liking someone every day. It's about loving them enough to stay, even when it's hard. You don't leave when things get tough, you stay because you know it's worth fighting for." David felt a pang of guilt as the old man spoke. But what if? What if I'm not enough? What if I can't give her what she needs anymore? The old man turned to look at David, his expression serious now. "Marriage isn't about being enough all the time. There will be days when you feel like you've failed, and there will be days when she feels the same. But it's not about perfection. It's about commitment. You promised her forever, didn't you? David nodded slowly, the weight of those words sinking in. He had promised Sarah forever, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what that meant. "Let me tell you something," the old man continued, his voice growing softer. "When Margaret and I first got married, we were poor. We had nothing but each other, and it wasn't easy. We fought over money, over time, over things that seem so small now. But every time I wanted to leave, I'd remember why I fell in love with her in the first place. I'd think about the way she smiled when she looked at me, the way she cared for our children, the way she stood by me when I lost my job and thought the world was falling apart. And every time I thought about leaving, I'd realize that I had more reasons to stay." David looked down at his hands, thinking about Sarah. He thought about the first time they met, how her laughter had filled the room and made him feel like he was the only man in the world. He thought about the way she looked at their children, the way she stayed up late when they were sick, the way she supported him even when they didn't have much to give each other. "You're right," David whispered. "I've been so focused on everything that's wrong, I forgot about all the things that are right." The old man smiled, patting David gently on the shoulder. "It's easy to forget. Life gets busy, and sometimes, love takes a back seat. But here's the thing, love isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you have to choose, every single day. You have to choose to love her, even when she's not easy to love. And she has to choose to love you, even when you're not at your best. That's what makes a marriage last." David felt a lump in his throat. He had been running away from his problems, thinking that leaving would make everything better. But now, he realized that leaving wouldn't solve anything. It would only create new problems, problems for his children, for Sarah, and for himself. "I don't want to leave," David said quietly, almost to himself. "I don't want to give up on my family." "Then don't," the old man said firmly. "Go home. Talk to her. Not about the fights or the stress, but about how you're feeling. Tell her you're struggling, and listen when she tells you how she's feeling too. Marriage is a partnership, not a competition. You're both on the same team, even when it doesn't feel like it." David nodded, feeling a sense of clarity that he hadn't felt in a long time. The weight on his chest had lifted just a little, and for the first time in months, he felt like there was hope. "Thank you," David said, turning to the old man. "I don't even know your name, but thank you." The old man smiled. "My name's Henry. And don't worry, son. You'll be all right. Just remember, love is a choice. And if you keep choosing her, even when it's hard, you'll make it through." David stood up, feeling a surge of determination. He looked down at Henry, who was now gazing at the pond, lost in his own memories. "I will," David said, his voice steady. "I'll choose her." With that, David turned and walked back toward his home. The night was still quiet, but the air felt different now, lighter, more full of possibility. When he got home, he found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered before he could say anything. "I didn't mean to push you away." David walked over to her, taking her hands in his. "I'm sorry too," he said softly. "I've been struggling, and I didn't know how to tell you. But I don't want to give up on us. I want to make this work." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she looked at him. "Me too," she whispered. And in that moment, as they held each other in the quiet of their kitchen, David knew that the old man was right. Marriage wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing love, day after day, even when it was hard. And so, David and Sarah decided to start choosing each other again. They knew it wouldn't be easy, and there would still be hard days ahead. But they had something worth fighting for, a love that had been tested by time, but was still standing strong. And from that day on, David never thought about leaving again. Instead, he chose to stay, to fight for his family, and to love his wife the way he had promised all those years ago.